The Chinese leader Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden have had face-to-face talks ahead of the G20 summit, their first since Mr. Biden entered the White House. It's hoped the meeting will ease relations that have been tricky for some time, marred by disagreements over issues ranging from Taiwan to trade. The G20 summit is already fraught with tension over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. President Putin isn't attending, but his foreign minister Sergei Lavrov is there. Mr. Lavrov denying reports earlier today that he had been taken to hospital to be treated for a health condition. The Russian foreign ministry said that this apparent news was fakery of the highest order. Well, our correspondent Karishma Vaswani is in Bali and earlier gave us more details on that meeting between the US and Chinese leaders.
This is an opportunity not just to have one discussion, but I think the hope on both sides is it will lead to more discussions. And just to say, that conversation is taking place right now, as you pointed out. And what we have heard President Xi say just in the last few minutes, speaking to the American delegation, speaking to Mr. Biden, who opened that discussion. What we've heard from the Chinese president is that it's good to see you, he said to Joe Biden. The last time we met was in Davos more than 5 years ago, pointing out, of course, that having a face-to-face meeting is critical. And in fact, he said that directly to Joe Biden, saying that nothing can substitute face-to-face. And today we have this face-to-face meeting. And this, I think, in and of itself, we really cannot emphasize enough how important it is for these two leaders to sit down at the table, as they're doing right now, on either side, flanked by some of their most important officials. On the Chinese side, you've got Wang Yi accompanying President Xi Jinping, a key figure in the Chinese political system. On the US side, President Biden is seated next to Janet Yellen, again emphasizing that this is not just about geopolitics, it's very much about the global economy, and that will be one of the key considerations for these two leaders as they sit down and thrash out those thorny issues over the course of these next few hours.
Karishma Vaswani in Bali. Well, let's discuss the G20 some more. I'm joined now by Dr. Eugenio Kusumano, who is the international relations expert and associate professor of politics at the University of Messina. Dr. Kusumano, thank you very much for joining us today. We know that Vladimir Putin didn't want to attend because of the expected criticism over the invasion of Ukraine. Sergei Lavrov, though, is there. What do you think the discussion will be around the war in Ukraine at this summit?
Thanks for having me. Even if the theme of this G20 is recovering together from the pandemic, we cannot expect too much togetherness. And that is because the war in Ukraine and the geopolitical division that this entails will inevitably dominate the agenda. Disagreement over Ukraine will make finding consensus difficult on other issues as well, including economic issues. And that is what we can expect. But even if the meeting will be over short of a joint declaration and without a picture of the world leaders, it is, as we already heard, something very important and positive. Even if nothing visible will come out of it, state delegates will talk to each other, will understand each other's red line, and will find some avenues for coordinating, if not cooperating.
So on the subject of cooperation, that meeting between President Xi and President Biden, how much softening of relations between the two countries will there be as a result of this, do you think?
I think this will be a very consequential meeting for several reasons. As we heard already, Xi and Biden know each other, but this will be the first face-to-face meeting with each of them sitting as president. And both Xi and Biden come to this meeting in a position of domestic strength. Xi has obtained an unprecedented third term as China's leader at the Communist Party Congress. Biden obtained an unexpectedly positive result as at the midterm elections and salvaged the Democratic majority in the Senate. And paradoxically, we were talking about the war in Ukraine earlier. I think that the war in Ukraine might offer some additional opportunities for dialogue. On the one hand, Russia's difficulties in Ukraine may have shown China that pushing over Taiwan right now and trying to take over Taiwan by military means in the short term is not a good idea. And moreover, if China accepts, as the US wants, putting some more pressure on Russia to end the invasion, then the US might be willing to reciprocate with some concessions on some other fronts, such as the limits that they set on the export of semiconductors and microchips to China.
Well, so much to watch on that particular angle. Moving on to the subject of climate, are we going to see any particular signals out of the G20 that may influence the COP27 debate, particularly around the issue of climate justice and whether those bigger, more polluting countries are willing to deliver some kind of aid to the countries that have historically not been responsible for the climate warming, but are often suffering the worst consequences?
Yeah, of course, this is a very crucial issue for Indonesia. But again, I'm afraid that the geopolitical moment is not ripe for great achievements on the climate front. Issues like the looming food crisis, the economic recessions, hiccups in the flow of fertilizers and energy commodities will dominate the agenda. So I do not expect anything major to come up when it comes to combating climate change, even if this is an issue that should be at the center of the agenda.
OK, Dr. Eugenio Kusumano from the University of Messina. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And we were telling you just a little earlier about those reports by a couple of news agencies that the Russian foreign minister was or had been taken to hospital to be treated for a heart condition. He had arrived in Bali representing Russia because President Putin is not attending. We then heard from the Russian Foreign Ministry that this was fakery of the highest order. I'm not sure if we can bring you some pictures. We have seen some pictures of Sergei Lavrov. There he is, sitting outside his hotel room, casually dressed, as you can see. And he told reporters there that they've been writing for about 10 years that our president is ill. This is a kind of game that is not new in politics, he said. So he was denying those reports that he was unwell in any way or had been taken to hospital. Sergei Lavrov there, the Russian foreign minister.